Hello, everybody. I know this is an odd angle. I am sitting on the floor. These days, it's fall, all right? So the light's changing, the temperature is changing. It's late October, and I noticed, as many of you might, that you go through hormonal changes and testosterone and growth hormone and things like that during the season, and so my joints don't always feel as good. And so I'm spending more time on the floor, and as I look at podcasts and things, I stretch here on the floor while I do it. So please forgive the angle. Please forgive the lighting. I may be looking at the screen a little bit weird, and let me just show you. I have these glasses from the VA, but as you can see, they begin to reflect what's on the screen. So please make do. Please be forgiving. So it is my unfortunate duty, I believe, to do another obituary, which is Master Katsuya Kisaka of the Japan Karate Association. He was an 8th Dan. He was my first ever instructor in New Jersey, and I found out he passed away a few months ago, I believe at the age of 86, which, is a hell of a run, To give you an idea of his importance, his pedigree, and his significance in karate in America, he was one of the first Japanese instructors in New Jersey. I believe he opened his school here. I believe he got to America around 65 or 67, around that time. And he was a legendary figure. If you're not sure of this, if you're a book collector, I believe it's called Dynamic Karate. It's a 1-volume hardcover published by Masatoshi Nakayama, an original Funakoshi student who later became the Grand Master of the Japan Karate Association, the JKA. And Master Kisaka's in it as a young man. He's in it competing for the All Japan Karate Championships. He almost made it. I think he made it to the finals. I don't know if he made it to the final match. And I think he was fighting Masaki Yuke. And forgive me if I'm not pronouncing all this properly. As a matter of fact, I think Master Kisaka's first name properly is Katsuhara, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe the following year after that book was published, he did win the All Japan Karate Championship, which that's a historical accomplishment. Now, I don't know how. I know by the late 60s there was quite a few karateka all over the world and all over Japan, and I'm assuming that it was a fairly strong field, right? I mean, perhaps in the 80s or 90s, with more population, more Japanese people competing, even some gaijin, that maybe there were more competitors, but I think by the late 60s it was fairly well established. And I know, like many Japanese his generation, he definitely had training in judo and kendo from the public school system. And I heard somewhere that he was a champion in kendo, but I can't get specifics. There's not a lot written about him. I have mentioned him in a previous video. So one of his black belts, who actually was one of the instructors when I was there as a kid, kind of attempted to eviscerate me and challenge my integrity, and I fought back. And I said what I said, and I stand by what I said. No man is perfect. I am not perfect. People point out my flaws all the time, and people point out falsely flaws I don't have. People also malign me. So, but I try to live up to what I say. All right. So I'm going to start with the many immense positives of this man. First of all, he was my first instructor, so everything I did followed afterwards is influenced or flavored by JKA Shotokan. The emphasis on basics, the emphasis on sort of always trying to put all the elements together. The hip rotation, the focus, speed and power sometimes. Sometimes you would do things slow, but always mental focus, working the legs, the hips, as you rotate the hips, slamming the rear here, sort of pushing off on the rear heel, straightening that back leg, rotating that hip, and all a fraction of a second before you begin to turn the waist and shoulder, they lock their shoulders, which I don't practice anymore, but it is a powerful style, but also a fast style. It's what many people call an external style, but I'm going to fight a little bit against that. Generally, the term so-called external styles, which I believe that's a misnomer. There is no external Oriental style. Okay, certainly not an external Chinese style, and karate has, I think, falsely been maligned by many people just as a sort of advertising thing. If you look at the lives of most old school JKA instructors, many of them have passed away already. Teruyuki Okazaki, Masatoshi Nakayama, right? Many made it to their late 80s or 90s. Many were just a few years short of 100. Okay, and if they had been practicing a purely external martial art that burns you out, let's say competitive boxing, all right? I mean, you expect the mind, the body, and the internal organs to be worn out and life to be shortened. Many of these men were incredibly active past their 50s, into their 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Training till the year they died, teaching, demonstrating. Obviously, a 60-year-old man is not going to be throwing lockout Yokogeri Kikomi side thrust kick at height level with with the speed and power that he did in his 20s. But go look through the JKA archives and look at these men and some of the women training, and you will see that it's not as obvious, but there are many so-called soft internal elements to the style. There has to be. Some of these JKA instructors outlive Tai Chi instructors and Bagua instructors that, if all what they claim to be and what they claim their arts do is true, they would all be living past 100, right? So I'm going to say that the Shotokan style as practiced by the JKA has many internal elements, but they're not as obvious at first. You start from the external and the muscular and move towards the internal, the mental, and the technical. All right? So he was an incredible kicker. He had a combination of both speed and power and in a way that's done that I don't see around me much. You know what I mean? I don't see it. He had a unique way. The way he threw the front kick is the way I try to throw my front kick to this day. When it comes to a thrusting front kick and a snapping front kick, I don't think there's anything better in terms of actually damaging your opponent. It is not a teep. It is not a push kick. It is not a quick snapping kick to the groin. It's a penetrating shot to the body that is designed to break bones, crush internal organs with maximal efficiency for the effort you put in. All right. He instilled in me this idea. I try to practice this to this day, where he worked out with you. He didn't just stand there and call out exercises and numbers, repetition. I've seen instructors that do their own personal workouts, and then when it comes time to teach, they're standing there, and they might demonstrate one or two techniques and then expect you to do it, and they'll just kind of let you do it 100 times and make a few corrections. He was not a lazy man. When people ran, he ran with them, barefoot, sometimes on concrete and blacktop, sometimes on snow. When people did blocking drills, when they did kata, he would meticulously demonstrate kata over and over, different speeds, different angles, different intensities. He would do the push-ups with you, the sit-ups, the leg lifts. He had white hair when I met him in the early 80s. I heard he died at 86, right? In 2023. So take. I read a report of him on the internet in 2009. He was running winter special training where they run around barefoot with no shirt in the snow if they're men. The women obviously wear some kind of top. And, led the warm-ups personally and strenuously. And so he would have been, in his 60s? Right? late 60s probably. And I heard even as recently as last year, he was still there teaching the classes, still personally teaching classes, demonstrating to his ability. So that's an ethic that is just an incredible ethic of hard work. He was, in terms of physical skill and ability, he was the epitome of a master of JKA karate and epitome of a master in the martial arts. I have mentioned, and I will continue to mention, that he could be brutal sometimes. He would sometimes hit you, and not in the context of sparring. Just he might get mad at something you did or said, and maybe he said something, and it was very hard to understand him. His English wasn't that great, and he would bark it out. And if you didn't get it, he'd slap you or kick you. He'd slap non-members of the school. There was a written account in an internet page of someone who trained with him in his Philadelphia days, of him breaking a guy's jaw for basically the head instructor, Master Kisaka, was shouting out instructions, left down block, right reverse punch, right? And the senior brown belt kind of repeated it, like left brown belt, right reverse punch, sort of as the senior student was probably expected to be a cheerleader, motivational senior, and he took offense to that and turned around and kicked him and broke his jaw. It is written. It is not my account. It has been on the internet for years. It is from a credible source, and shortly after from that, he was banished or left to Trenton, where he's probably the most brutal instructor I've ever met, who would, I watched him hit black belts, like boom, full on in the solar plexus, guys that had been there for over a decade, and just knock them out during a demonstration of the technique where you wouldn't have expected that you were going to get hit, that, because he had perfect control. So he would hit people on purpose. I don't agree with that philosophy, never have, never will. If we ever meet in the afterlife, I'm like, hey, just don't agree with you. Think there's many other better ways to provide lessons. You were raised in 50s, 40s, 50s Japan, and that whole generation went through World War II, a different world. That whole brutalistic philosophy didn't really help Japan and didn't help the world. But everything else, I can only have utter admiration. If I could, in terms of my ability to perform techniques, my ability to, bodily destroy someone in fighting, if I could have a quarter of what he had, people would be probably crashing cars in a rush to watch me practice in a park. Okay? That's the high opinion I had of him then and now in terms of his skill. In general, the Shotokan style is not my style. I think there's many. If you watch most Shotokan black belts, even 8th and 9th degree Japanese black belts who've been doing this forever, when they're doing kumite and they throw their shoulders, they throw it like a kung fu guy in kumite. They turn the waist and turn that shoulder out and maximize their reach, and sometimes there's an inclination, right? That whole lock shoulder thing, it's just not the way to go in actual fighting, in any style, any format. Oftentimes many Japanese karate stylists, I think, get freakishly good at things that aren't necessarily practical for most of us mere mortals, and that don't necessarily reflect the origins of karate in Okinawa, right? The Okinawans have an approach that is far, far closer to Fukinese Kung Fu, right? If you watch Five Ancestor Fist, Bak Mei, even Wing Chun, you will see many parallels and similarities in different Okinawan karate methods, right? My main upset upon learning of his death are two things. Number one, the dojo closed. He had many black belts over the years, and many of them were lifelong students. I guess they felt like without him, they affectionately called him the old man, without the old man, that it wasn't worth keeping the place open. Hell, I mean, they may have put their funds into keeping the place open just so that he had a dojo, because he inspired fierce loyalty, almost sensei worship, almost a religious cult in many of his senior black belts. Time and time again with old school Shotokan, especially JKA people, if you want to talk about one little technical point of how Okinawan karate, was modified to become Shotokan, and how, maybe standing in these very deep stances is something you won't really use in the real world and will get you leg kicked and, double legged. They get really angry. They take it personally, and they'll attack you personally. They may challenge you, right? Physically. I, on the other hand, I want to know. I want to know what works, especially what works for me. Fiercely loyal. So, with all the second and third, and I think a couple of fourth dans. I know one of his students, Ed Casimir, got a fourth dan at one point. He was very, very, very reticent to rank people highly. That may have actually held him back. It doesn't make sense to me, because in Japan, oftentimes, if someone's been training 7 or 8 years, they get a high promotion and they get sent overseas to teach the art and propagate it. Sometimes I think it's a little unfair, especially if that person's been with you for decades and has put in the work and demonstrates the skill. At some point, you're not building character, you're just kind of holding people back. But that's a Japanese thing. May not have even been his decision. But if you believed in what he taught that much, if you believed in the value of the dojo and the style, you should have found a way to keep it open. Or maybe I'm misspeaking. Maybe they're just teaching at a YMCA. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it was a pivotal experience for me as a child. Next thing. The Trentonian newspaper. None of the newspapers, none of the regional media mentioned it beyond an obituary, and they sometimes do features and articles on a local tournament champ. Usually the way that happens is that person's family member, instructor, someone who knows them writes about that person and submits it to the paper. And again, with all the high-ranking black belts, I'm kind of wishing someone does that. He does deserve to be memorialized in a place where he pioneered the martial arts and karate. I don't know if he was the first. I think Preston Carter and Gary Alexander may have taught in New Jersey before him, right? And maybe Don Nagel in Jersey City. But it is indeterminate right now. However, some of his followers were so fanatic that I could believe that one of them would try to hunt me down and kill me for the one small criticism that I have. And it's a criticism that I would have of many old school martial artists that trained in the 40s, 50s, or 60s. I think that some attitudes that arose out of, pre-World War II Japan during the militaristic period may not even serve the art. And if you go to Okinawa, oftentimes it'll be a completely different attitude and a way of training. If things can evolve from the Okinawan way to the Japanese 1930s way, they can evolve in other ways and still retain the essence, the value, and the central teachings. That is not an insult. I've heaped compliment after compliment on his ability, the things he taught, the skill, the effort, the spirit, and all that. And again, those of you who followed him for a lifetime, give him a better try to give him a memorial. I was there as a kid briefly, and I'm giving him one right now, right? And that's not even a style that if I had my choice to train any style in the world, I don't know if that would be on my top 10 list. Okay? But I am taking the time out to memorialize him and laud him and praise him, and also humanize him by saying, yeah, there is this one area where, and I'll be honest with you, I was that way for a long time. I was kind of brutal. I was kind of rough. I was harsh with people that I taught. And I feel like I had to be forced to learn a better way. Okay, but either way, I mean, I won't forget what I learned there. I won't forget the man. I won't forget the blood, sweat, and tears, right? And this set me on the path that I like to walk now, all my life. I was 9, I think, when I started. I'm 54. Still like the martial arts. I can still whip out some Shotokan style Gyakuzuki, Gedan Barai, Ageyuke, Magiri, Yokogeri, Keage, Yokogeri, Kekomi, right? Along with techniques that have nothing to do with Shotokan. All right, but anyway, in memoriam.